pretty good. I'm doing what I always do because, I'm at that age where I trust myself, but not that much, especially when it comes to technology. So I
Yeah.
always like to make sure we're live. Oh, hold on. There we go. We're live.
All right.
Um, Man, I was looking forward to this one, and I'm going to share it on my Facebook page right now. Um, I was really looking forward to this conversation, and I have some questions written down, and we'll get there. But I also just want to take a minute, if you're okay with it, and if you're not, I'm good with you just giving me the visual thumbs down, like in the arena, and we'll move on. But we had a passing of somebody locally, Trevor Mercer, or John Mercer,
John
John
Mercer.
Mercer. Did that fall on you to cover, sir?
About 30 minutes ago, literally, I got an email from Allison, the editor, saying that Channel 12 had posted on their Facebook that John had passed away. Um, I do most of the media sort of coverage, and I've done it for so long that uh, you remember. Do you know Dan Bowers
Hmm.
from Arts Build? It became a morbid sort of running joke, if you will. I used to have to call him and say, I'm not calling for an obituary, because he was always a good go to guy for a lot of people in the arts world.
Right.
And I mean, I think there was about a 3 or 4 week period where I was calling him once a week to get comments from, everybody from Dennis Palmer to Ruth Holmberg and I mean, I will say this, Clint, because I think it's kind of important because it took me a long while to come to the conclusion. I mean, nobody wants to make that phone call,
Mm.
particularly to a family member. It looks so callous and crass, for a journalist to be making that phone call. But what I've learned is the reality is, in most cases, people want to have that opportunity to say something about a loved one that
Right.
appears in an obituary forever. You know what I mean? Um, and so it doesn't make it any easier.
Well, and stuff's going to be said. He was is a high profile local media guy, and well known and well loved, and good at his job. And
Right.
um, the older I get, the younger people are when I start seeing that they've passed away. So
Yeah.
if when I'm 52, and he was just a few years older than me. And so when you read that, and you kind of probably agree with this or can relate to it, we relate to that. We're going, oh man,
Yeah.
that at home. It makes us think about things. And so I hate that you had to make those phone calls, and I appreciate you taking the time to jump on with me because it's not a good day when that kind of stuff happens at all.
No, I did. I mean, I had met John. I didn't know him very well. I know. I mean, I interned at Channel 12. So back in 1986, David Moore, who's over there, was there then. The amazing David Moore, the videographer, and Chip Chapman was there then. That's who I called today. Um, so I mean, it's a news story, but it's like you said, it's a whole lot more personal than just that. He's a year younger than me.
Oh wow.
Two college age daughters.
Yeah.
People that are listening, I'm sure they're sitting there wondering, was it, coronavirus? It was not. It was a heart related condition, and it's something, and that's really all the family wants to say. So
Well, it's I mean it's just happened too. I mean,
yeah, he passed away last night. He
yeah.
actually had the incident last week, um, and was in the hospital for the last 6 days or so. So
Sad I had no clue. Well, most of us don't. Most of us wouldn't know that. Yeah.
right, right.
Well, so and my microphone goes in and out. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah, I hear you
Okay,
fine.
good. So
So
with
you're gonna say your office backspace is pretty minimalist. Mine is not. So
no.
I'm working on that.
Okay, so I can't get into the studio over at Sean where we built one over there with Sean, and I know you're familiar with doing radio shows over there with
Right.
a few of his folks and him. And so I had to I've got a good mic someone gave to me, which Monica Perez, host of the Propaganda Report, she sent one to me because we do so much Facebook Live stuff. But I had to put together this in a little spare room. So I put up pictures of my grandfather, some Irish rugby flags. I finally got to hang my dog pictures that are playing poker and shooting pool.
Nice.
And so, yeah, I put it up, and I've had comments offline. People like, dude, you have a lot of clutter behind you, or other people like, man, you don't have enough behind you. And I just realized whatever I like is what I'm going to do. If they don't like it, they
Absolutely.
don't have to watch.
My other, I do a thing with Channel 3 most Wednesdays. I'm not going to do it tonight, but it's in the other room because they sent home or I brought home an iPad that I use, and it's my wall of CDs. So
Oh, really?
I worried that it looks a little too ostentatious, but these are the two best shots that I have where the audio, where you're not hearing the fire engines going by all the time.
Well, though, it's it's funny you say that. Now that we're all kind of being forced into, well, the written word is still out there, of course, and that's what you do. But newspaper, or reporting, print, and radio or podcasting lends itself to the background. No one cares about your background. Nobody knows what your background's like when you're writing a story.
Right.
Now that we've been forced to more Zoom and live Facebook or video recording platforms, everybody's much more conscious of the haircut. I had to do a number 3 home quarantine haircut.
I'm due.
Well, it all of a sudden we've all become video folks. And it's good and bad though, man. I think at first, about 5 weeks ago, some of the folks that I were asking on was very conscious, and they still are, about how they look and their surroundings. But now people are actually showing up to some of these videos just how they are. And it's organic, it's authentic, and people really respond to that. People that watch it go, finally, all the veneers off, and we just get the people.
Well, the old saying, got a face for radio and in my case, voice for newsprint too. So, there's a reason for a lot of these cliches. But yeah, I mean, there's still, you still ought to run a comb through it every now and then and put a decent shirt on and that kind of shave.
Every now and then.
Every now and then. But I mean, I'm sure I'm got a pair of shorts on. I've been in
Are
a
you
pair of shorts for 2 months.
So I walked out of the studio, or this is my studio, the other day. My daughter, she's quarantined with me, and I had on a black polo, and that's about my dress up shirt, right? It's a black polo, and I had on these raggedy Holdfield shorts that I've been out cutting trees down since the storm. And she just looked at me and she goes, "I can't even talk to you right now." And I went, and I had on my Birkenstocks, my slide-ons with socks, because again, took the boots off outside.
Sure.
So. And real quick, shout out to Gary Miller, said it's a great guest and a good man. So Gary Miller's a good guy. He's on my podcast in the past. Great dude.
He's terrific. He and I befriended each other at the 42 shooting at Engle Stadium, and what a trip he's been on.
He's got some good stories.
Yeah, he's got some good stories.
So you said you interned in '86. Are you from? Let's do just a minute or two of how in the world Barry got to the Free Press, and we won't make it too long because I know that can take a lot of little side conversations. Where are you from originally? Are you from Chattanooga?
Well, no, not really. I mean, it is kind of a funny story because I've told it a bunch. But no, I was born in Lafayette, Indiana. My dad got tired of shoveling snow, literally. So one of those sort of found something, below Kentucky that had a job and offer, and he came down here to work for Volunteer State Life, which is now Chubb. So we moved to North Georgia in '68, and then Brainerd in 1970. So pretty much
You're here. You went to high school here, right?
I went to Notre Dame, and that's the funny story is I very, very distinctly remember telling Becky Jordan, who was my English teacher. Becky, a lot of people from the theater center would know who Becky is, but she was an English teacher then. And I remember telling her, there is not a single thing you're teaching me in this class that I will use in any job I will ever have. Well, that was kind of stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so to your question, I was at UTC, and the guy there that was doing the record reviews just infuriated me. And while that was happening, I started taking some feature writing classes and did really well in them. And so I sort of went to the Echo and said, what do I have to do? Because this guy's killing me. And kind of found out that I really did like journalism, and particularly entertainment feature stuff. So that's what I've been doing.
I went to Carson Newman, a little school about 2.5 hours northeast of here.
Sure.
And when I transferred, I went to 1 year at Chattanooga State because my mom and dad were like, learn how to study before you go learn how to live on your own. And I went, okay. And I was a journalism major. You didn't know that, did you? I was a
No,
journalism
no,
major.
I did not.
Yeah, and my journalism professor, after the first year, she was super cool. She brought me, took me aside, and she said, "You have really great writing skills. You're creative." She goes, "I could," because I like to write poetry and all kinds of stuff. She goes, "You're super creative. You have a good grasp of words." She was building me up. You know what she's doing, right? You're so good. You should go do something else. And I went, "What do you mean?" She goes, your grasp of punctuation and what really makes a good article readable is hard, because I just threw in stuff like that's a comma and a dash
Right.
and three dots, and she would be like driving her crazy because I worked my, it would make sense, but I found this out, and a friend of mine named Barbara Bowen told me this a long time ago. I write like people talk.
Yeah.
So I'll put in weird pauses. I'll create, so I don't write like you do, which is for reading that makes sense and leads people down a path. And I just didn't, I never could, my brain could not grasp that. So I
Well,
got out of it real quick.
I, look, I mean, it's a funny story, but I mean, it's the truth. What I said to Miss Jordan, and if I didn't have Lisa Denton and editors like her and Alex Chambliss, it'd be a whole another thing. Because I'm not good at that either. I mean, I think I'm pretty good at getting facts and building a story, but as far as like the rules of it, that's not my
Well, see, and
forte.
two though, back then, and you know this as well as I do, they didn't have these fancy things with spell check and with excuse me, with spell check and all these resources right here. I mean, now my daughter can put together a story and hit buttons, and it just goes, and you're like, really?
Yeah, when I started, we were just coming out of the typewriters. We'd just gotten some computers that were basically typewriters.
Right.
Um, they didn't have spell check. They didn't have all that stuff. I mean, you went to the library if you needed to look something up.
I lived in a
We had book. We had
thesaurus.
a lot of books around us
Yeah.
back then.
Well, whenever I would start writing for certain professors, I would know I need to get the thesaurus out,
Yeah,
because really cool can only last every, you can only say really cool.
very good.
Yeah,
Very, very good.
absolutely. Super duper, very, very good.
Very good.
I was the guy that when they would say, write a paper about England, I'd start off going, England is nothing like Japan, because I already had written an article or written a paper about Japan,
That's good. That's
That's
good.
me. Yeah. All right. So you become a reporter, you're doing lifestyle stuff and music. And I want to try to, and I hate to say this, but most people know you through the paper. And I want to make sure we talk about that a little bit, but I also like sharing the love to podcast. You have a podcast.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I mentioned thank you for what you do. I don't know if people out there realize it, but Clint is a real champion of podcast. Everybody constantly sharing and posting and reposting, and
Well,
that
thank
means
you.
a lot. But yeah, um, about well, 2007. The 2002, I went to the first Bonnaroo for the first day just to check on the traffic because it was such a big news story. If you remember, the traffic was lined up almost from here to there,
Yeah.
and so they sent me and Tim Barber up there, and I whined and complained and didn't want to go because I figured we were just going to be stuck in traffic. And man, we walked into that farm up there, and I thought this is the coolest thing ever. But at that time, I was what 42, something like that, and I don't camp. So the idea of camping in a field was not worth, you know, why would I do that? And then about 3 years later, in '07, the big bosses figured out that the reporters that were going were hourly, and I was salaried. And so they said, we need a volunteer who's salaried. And I mean, I knew what that meant.
Yes.
So since '07, I've been going. And
And you camp, right? You do
oh,
camp
yeah, we
now.
do the
Yeah.
camp in a tent. And I mean, I love it. And I probably 10 years ago started going with a lot of names that people will know. Mike Dewar does music at Rhythm and Brews and now Songbirds. Brian Stone, Brad Steiner, radio guys.
You'll get
Sean
in trouble
Smith.
hanging out with radio guys. Just go. I'm just telling you up
I've
front.
already done it.
Okay.
Tara Veland, who runs the Signal. I mean, it's all these kind of group. Well, about 3.5 years ago, in 2016, it was pretty weak lineup. Most people would agree,
Right.
and the numbers were down. They're about half the attendance. And so I just randomly said to Brad at lunch one day, we should do a Facebook Live from up there to kind of spice things up for ourselves. And he immediately said, we need to do a podcast. I was not very familiar with them, to be honest with you. I'd heard of them, but didn't understand the appeal. You know, I don't sit in traffic for an hour. That's what my conception of what podcast listeners were, guys on
Right.
trains and buses, you know.
Right.
Um, and he took it and ran. Within 3 days, he had the URL, he had the design, the graphic, he had the name. He'd reached out to some industry people. I reached out to AC Entertainment people, and they said, "We love it. You can't use our name in your name, and you can't use any of our graphics, but we'll give you anything else, we can."
Right.
And he came up with the name The What Podcast. The stages up there are called the what, which, this, that, and the other. They were at the time. So the what, it's the what podcast, which bands that matter this year, I think is the tagline. So it gets them all in there.
Right.
And we thought we'd do it for those 2-3 months leading up to it. We just thought we'd focus on the 80% of the bands on the lineup that we'd never heard of. And man, we're still doing it. I mean, we do it every week. Last 2 weeks ago, he had an interview with Ed O'Brien from Radiohead. This past weekend, I had one with the girls from Larkin Poe. Um, the Bonnaroo people have been great about giving us contacts and hooking
Well,
us up.
that's what I was going to ask you. How's it changed? First of all, the name, and I might have missed it. The What Podcast?
The What Podcast, the stages up there are called, the main one is the What stage. The
Gotcha.
second biggest is the Which stage, and then there's this, that, and the other stage.
See, I didn't know. I've never been to Bonnaroo, so
Yeah,
there
there's a
you
Here
go.
stage. Yeah, it's. I never really asked them why they came up with that, but it's funny because especially for first timers, it takes you 5 years to remember.
Yeah, which
Get your
stage?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's
It's
a
almost
who's
like
on
a who's
first.
man. Yeah, who's on first?
Who's on
I
first?
think they did that on purpose a little bit of
Yeah,
that, to be
I'm
honest with you,
sure.
just to mess with people after they've had a few brewskis. What
Yeah,
stage?
yeah. And a lot of the pods, as they used to call them, were named after the Flintstones or stuff like that. So there's a
How
lot
has
of
it been though? So Bonnaroo got canceled, did it not? Just like Riverbend, or is they just rescheduled, or
They
what's their?
rescheduled till mid-September, towards May 4th, basically. But the pretty strong rumor is that ain't even going to happen. Um, most of the most of what we're hearing from the industry people is that nothing is going to happen till at least November.
Yeah.
Live Nation, C3, all those people.
Well, then when it gets outdoors, that's kind of crazy. I mean, it seems like what's the weather going to be? A lot of unknowns at that point. It seems to me.
Well, there always is that.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it's the question of insurance. It's the question of
Yep.
your own psyche. Do you want to be rubbing elbows with 79,000 people, in a farm in
I say
Maine?
no when everybody's healthy.
Yeah,
So much less when everybody might be sick. Though, you say the insurance thing, though. I got a buddy who's a football coach, head football coach, and I here in Chattanooga, so don't nobody start reaching out to somebody for a quote, but another college. And I asked the question on one of my Facebook pages, do you think we'll have football in the fall? And of course, yes, no. Everybody is. It's amazing. We're all constitutional scholars. We're all virus experts on Facebook. And he private messaged me, and he said one of the issues that they're going to have is insurance.
yeah,
Is when they come back in the fall, if insurance companies will cover them.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is obviously something that has been a topic on my mind as a newspaper person, but also as because of this podcast, but also because of a fan. And I I say it all the time. I think people assume that somebody is going to ring a giant bell, and we all just come running out of our front doors with cash,
Yep.
ready to have a good time, help everybody out that's been struggling, revitalize these festivals. But I mean, Clint, some of the questions are insurance, location. I mean, everybody's going to want that weekend, you know, which means they're going to need security, they're going to need fencing, they're going to need volunteers, they're going to need sponsors, they're going to
Yeah,
need
and if you multiply that towards every event, your weekend's gone from 52 options to maybe 30 that are viable for weather in a good year. Now
Right.
you're down to maybe a handful of options. And you know this way better than I do, Barry, because you talk to him and you live in this world. But if I'm a big band or a big singer, I'm planned already. I've already got a schedule plan in place, and I can't, November may not be an option for me.
Well, that's one of the points. It's a great point. First of all, if you think about what bands do, they don't set up shop in one location and we all go to them. They get in vans and go from Chattanooga to Atlanta to Orlando to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
So they're carrying whatever they may have with them that they picked up in Orlando or Chattanooga or wherever. So they're very worried about that.
Yeah.
Um, they that One of the early questions that I had was, which one do they choose? I mean, if they're if they're offered Bonnaroo or Songbirds or JJ's Bohemia, do they take JJ's just because they asked first? Do they hold out for a Bonnaroo?
Yeah.
And it's so complicated. And they are all trying to figure this out. And anybody who tells you they know what's going to happen is just wrong.
Nobody does. I will tell you something that I've been watching, and I had a gentleman on my podcast a few weeks ago who I've been a fan of for years. And I'm on a scale of 1 to 10. I'm a fan of music, like a 7 or 8 or 9. But knowing the history of music or how to speak to the musician, I'm a 5. And I know just enough karate to get beat up by somebody that knows karate is who I am. But I had a guy named Marty Ray, the Marty Ray Project, and I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but I had him on my podcast, and he's awesome. But one of the things we talked about is during this time, a lot of big bands are doing great things online. They're doing these free concerts, but there's opportunities for the local bands to kind of shine now because people may have some time to go find new music. Have you seen that, or have you noticed that during this last 6, 7 weeks, or has it not really changed? Has that just always been the case since social media came on the scene for the local?
It's a little bit of both. What we're finding is there's somewhat of an appetite for people who are missing it, and there's a lot of bands that are trying it. And what they're finding is it's a lot contrary to what we were saying early. It's still about quality.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like podcasts. Everybody thinks they want to do them, like be a columnist. Everybody thinks they're a columnist, but I contend they have about two good ones in them, maybe three, and then they just keep repeating themselves. So the bands that are doing it, the ones that put together quality things, it works. Um, but we in fact we talked about this on our podcast this past weekend. Some festivals are trying to put together online versions, with a lineup of eight or
Yeah.
ten acts. I think it's a terrific idea, and maybe I'll miss it enough that it's something I want to do. But that's not why. I mean, it's the being there with a lot of people. Um, that's a big part of
I
the
talked to Rich
quality.
Mazingo about doing radio shows because we were to have her do a radio show like this. And again, I know you're in and out of studios, but a lot of people now are getting used to this. But there's still something about being able to sit in a studio with you and watch your body language and
Sure.
what you, because it's a real time and it's more organic. And so it's the same thing in a concert. I mean, I can watch ZZ Top video, but when I went to the concert back in the '80s, it was way better.
It's different. It's
Yeah.
completely different. Now, what I will say is if it's just a straight concert, say, it gets a little tedious, but a lot of these guys are so clever and so creative. And if they're giving me something extra, whether it's interviews or behind the scenes stuff or just something, um, it's a different animal, and I like that. But
Well, that's what's helped. When I was talking to Marty Ray, whether it's a local or somebody like him who's never signed with a big label, even the big bands, social media has kind of given them now the opportunity to take the fan Clint Powell and through video show them a little bit, just enough of behind the scenes, which is really what we want. We want to get to know the people that we kind of idolize a little bit more.
it's funny because of YouTube and things like that. I've gone back and found some of the old Merv Griffin episodes and Dick Cavett.
Oh yeah.
Um, they used to have so much time with their guests, you know? They'd have them for 20, 30 minutes. So you getting 30 minutes of Groucho Marx instead of a 30-second soundbite is it wasn't all gold. I mean, you've done radio. It's not
Yeah.
all, their editing can fix a lot of things.
Which I don't do any of, so people
No,
get what they get.
well,
Yeah.
we used to do that with our podcast because it was all audio. And here this last year, Lord Taco, who's kind of our IT guy, pushed us to start doing YouTube because the numbers show that that's what you need to do. You need to do this. So it's changed a lot of that type of thing. Forced us to up our game and
After you're gonna get a haircuts like
get a
I did.
haircut.
You said something a minute ago, and I appreciate it. Thanking me for the podcast support. But the reason I like podcast, and I've had this conversation with folks, and it's a really it's a podcast. We could have a podcast about podcasting
Right.
because there's a lot of features. But the one thing I like about it, and I'm not a poo pooer. I'm not a negative guy. I like to support people, even if I may not agree with everything or really don't see a lot of value. But here's why. But if someone has passion, if Barry has passion about something, you do something right now for a living. That's what you do, and I'm glad you do what you love. You love to write. You're great at it, and you've done it for a long time. But anytime somebody steps out and does podcasting, and of course they want to make some money at it, I get it. But most of the time, they're doing something that they really are passionate about and love, and that adds to their life. And in my world, if we can share that and kind of support that, that's kind of the good. That's the good stuff of life.
Absolutely. I think I mentioned this on the podcast I did with you and a couple other guys there at the studio a couple of months ago. But for me, once we started doing it, the aha moment for me was when we started seeing the stats
Hmm.
come through and the numbers of countries that we were reaching. I mean, when I saw we had 3 listeners in North Korea, it just blew my mind. Now, Brad insists it's probably some computer bot that's just out there searching. I don't care. He can say whatever he wants to
A shout
say.
out to the
But
computer bot. Give him a
but we're
shout out.
huge. We're big in North Korea. Is
That's it.
all.
That's it.
But it just was such a. It was a literally an aha moment. It was two things. It was one. There's no rules, and you don't. I can sit in my Brainerd downstairs basement and reach North Korea or East Brainerd or
Right.
wherever. The guests that we've had on the What podcast, Patreon supporters, we actually have people who give us a little bit of money, which is just mind blowing to
That's
me.
awesome.
But random. I mean, we didn't do it on purpose, but Orlando, Dallas, this past weekend was upper northeast Ohio, Washington, um Oklahoma. You know what I mean? And they listen every week. They love it, and there's this communal thing about Bonnaroo, which is what brings us all together. I mean, I don't. I'm not trying to sit here and tell you it's because the show is so great, though I think we do pretty well. But it's that communal thing, and the podcast brings everybody together. We try to come out every Sunday. They tell us, it's their when they're doing their dishes or their Monday morning commute
Yeah.
or whatever. I mean, I joked about the train and all, but that's the thing about podcasts is it's been pounded into me for 20 something years that people have such a short attention span anymore that a news story needs to be in our 12 inches, and it needs to contain on the page type of, shorter, shorter, shorter.
Right.
And so that's always been in my head. When we started doing this podcast, people don't care. If
They
it's
don't.
interesting and they're interested, they will listen for 10 hours. They may
I
not
asked
listen to
somebody
the
asked me the other day how
train.
long the podcast should
I just
be, and I
lost
said,
your audio.
"Oh, did you?
I can't hear you.
I can hear you."
I can't hear you. I can see your mouth, but I can't hear you.
Well, I can talk. How about now?
No, I don't think I did anything.
Oh, click back in. Hold on a second. I'll send you a
Maybe I
message.
did.
Stay right there. I love this.
We might have to
Let's
fix it.
see.
Huh?
Click back into invite. Here we go.
No.
All right. Watch this. Check. You're gonna love live video. Watch this. Check. Can you see that?
Ah, I can do that.
There you go. All right. I'll say what I was gonna say. Somebody asked me the other day
Somebody did.
how long a podcast should be. So if you're listening to this, we may lose Barry, and Barry will come back. Um, but if there we go. I'm going to remove him. He'll join us again in a minute. But somebody asked me the other day how long a podcast should be. And I answered them however long a good conversation or topic takes. And he may be joining us again. Can you hear me now?
Can.
Okay, there you go. You're back. I was actually in the middle of answering the question about how long the podcast should be. So what I was saying is, and now somebody asked me the other day. I've been asked this a bunch. How long should a podcast be? And my answer is, however long a good conversation takes. Everybody has talked to somebody where it's been super entertaining and engaging for 20 minutes in person, and then you start wondering what kind of lie can I come up with to get out of the conversation. You as a host, you also feel that,
Right.
and that's the time to start cutting it off because that's the dead weight around the good stuff,
Yeah.
and people
But
don't care.
I am involved in another podcast, an industry podcast with a guy who's got a radio background, and we have this discussion a lot because he's pretty firm. He thinks either 10 minutes for some things and 20's it, and
Yeah.
we don't even look at the clock. I mean, we kind of shoot for that hour, but what we found is it's more because it's just natural. It's the one we just did. I think was an hour and 20.
Yeah.
It's two different interviews, but with both of those, you just feel it. You know when just like I know when I do an interview for the newspaper, I'm not writing for Rolling Stone. I'm not writing a biography. I know what I need.
Right.
So I'm not going to keep a guy on the phone for an hour knowing that in the first 5 minutes I got essentially what I need. Um, so, and then sometimes I have been on with an hour and hung up and realized I got nothing.
Yeah. I've done a couple of podcasts where I'm 5 minutes into talking, realizing they're not going to talk. And I've gone, oh, it's only been 7 minutes.
Yeah,
Great. I
thanks.
only have another, at least that's when you go, yeah, 15 minutes is my time shot. That's what we're wanting. So what itch does the podcast scratch for you? In other words, are you like the music junkie guy that's your real passion, or is it alongside of what you do with the free press? What does it do for you that was either missing or that you found? You know what I'm saying? I mean, what about it?
It's several things, and I'll go back in '07, '06, let's say. Prior to that, the concert scene, the music scene, I'd done it for 20 years, was pretty stale. I don't know if you went to it. You said you're early 50s.
52.
I'm
Yeah.
56, so you probably saw some of the same shows at the arena that I saw.
Yeah.
And they were a lot of fun. They were great. But then all of a sudden, I noticed it didn't matter if it was country or whatever. They all had the same formula. You could tell that the same coach had taught them all how to come out on the third song, say hello Chattanooga, and a fifth song, introduce your band, and so I mean it was just getting there. And Bonnaroo reopened all of that for me. It made live music fun again. It made it sexy and scary and frightening, and you didn't know what was going to happen like it's supposed to be. So the podcast kind of does that. I mean, it was a broadcast journalism major at UTC. I love the techie stuff. I love the nerd stuff. I like microphones and software. I don't get too deep in it, but I love all that stuff. So when we started doing the podcast, it was a chance. It was like I said, it was sort of that no rules, that wild west. Um, you weren't you weren't constricted by time. You weren't constricted by number of words in a print story or the length of it. You could talk about anything. So that was big. And then I also do. Uh, I created something about 2 years ago called People with Barry. That's another podcast that I do that I haven't really kept up with here lately. And it kind of answers your question, I think. There were all these stories that I had, or people that I had met that I had done stories on, that there was no reason to do a follow up for the paper, maybe. You know what I mean? There wasn't
Hmm.
a news peg, as we call it,
Yeah.
but they were still doing really interesting things. In fact, one of them I'm going to talk to here in just a little while, Genesis, the gray kid. We started having coffee together, and I mean, this guy is amazing. The art that he's doing and the reputation that he's building around the world. Um, I couldn't do a story on him every week, you know,
Yeah.
so I wanted to sit down with him. The other one was Holly Mulcahy. I did a podcast with her. Is the first, second chair, first chair. She was the concert master for the symphony and opera, and she started going into the Walker County Prison a couple of times a year and performing for the inmates.
Hmm.
And what I found so fascinating was she would perform and then ask them what they heard, and she never tried to lead or tell them. You know, it wasn't a history lesson. And I mean, I went down there for one performance and to watch, I think there were 80 inmates in those classic Georgia white, prison uniforms with the big black stripe down the side
Yeah.
stand up and talk about how they heard fear and trepidation and love. And I mean, you've been in locker rooms, you've been in, you know how guys are.
Yeah.
We don't sit quietly when somebody's doing something that we think is funny or whatever. There was not a sound. I mean, somebody
Wow.
would stand up and all of them would just pay full attention, listen to what he had to say. Um,
Well, see, and that's kind of what
it was amazing.
well, and the podcast I started during the break, and I wrote down the word over here while you were talking is so many times you'll hear announcers, or I did it because I'm not a radio guy like most radio guys. I've done it, but not near as some of the most well knowns, and people have done it for decades. They'll come back and say, "Man, I wish everybody could have heard what we talked about during the break."
Right.
And to me, that is exactly what you're talking about. That's where I don't have time on an 11-minute radio segment to actually talk to Barry about what I found interesting. But if I have a podcast, we can relax and go down the journey of what you just said. And that's where I think people actually will stay tuned, because I don't mean this in a bad way, but I know Barry writes for the Free Press. I can Google you and find out the most well-known facts about Barry Corder
Right.
pretty quick. But the other stuff, the
Right.
why he started the podcast, the what he said from Notre Dame High School, all that stuff you can't find in
Yeah.
Google.
No, you're exactly right. George S. Clinton is was another guest of mine. George is a Brainerd guy. Went there in the '60s. People, his work. He did the soundtrack for Mortal Kombat, the Austin Powers series. The
Oh
soundtrack
wow.
was, yeah. He's a local guy and very talented. And we just sat and talked about like that. And then I had Nathan Bell on one day to basically, and I want to revisit this idea. I'd love to do like a series on writing a song from
Right.
start to finish, from concept to, and it's very difficult. People have tried and done it, and if you're not interested, you lose interest pretty quick because it
Hmm.
gets sausage making kind of stuff. But that's the kind of thing you can't do in a newsprint story, and you can't do it on a 7 minute, radio segment.
Yeah.
Um,
Or a 5 minute talking heads TV statement where
exactly.
or segment where, hey, you got 4.5 minutes. Tell me the highlights of what you're here for. And I think that's what attracts people to podcasting. Looking back on it, you mentioned some interesting names, but looking specifically at the what, is there a couple of interviews that you kind of go, those were ones that you were giddy? I used the word giddy.
Yeah,
Yes, I did. I'm old. You know what the word, you're a journalism guy.
I
Giddy.
know. I love it. Yes, there have been many. We've had, well, Ed O'Brien 2 weeks ago. I mean, I wasn't in on that interview, but Brad was. I mean, Radiohead's as big a band as there is in the world,
Right.
and for Ed to spend 20 minutes on a Skype call with Brad was pretty terrific. Larkin Poe was there. One of the first ones that we had was Ashley Capps, who founded Bonnaroo, and that was a big boost, to be honest with you. That
Yeah.
was kind of a, hey, maybe this is a little more than, as Mike Dewar says, um, and this is the greatest compliment I think I've ever gotten. Mike, after about 8 episodes, said, "Man, don't tell Brad this, but I just thought it was going to be you two knuckleheads, being goofy. But I've listened to every episode." And went back and listened to some of them twice because they listened. He and his wife listened as they were traveling.
Right.
That meant a lot. So Ashley, I'll be real quick. Jeff Cuellar is a vice president in charge of development with Bonnaroo. He's been on 2 or 3 times, and that was sort of next level stuff because he went inside baseball with us on how they put this a festival together. We try not to make it just Bonnaroo. We try to make it festival,
Yeah.
yes, but it focuses. That one was great. Uh, Two more. Paul Janaway, St. Paul and the Broken Bones,
Mm-mm.
is hilarious. He's about 5'4", looks like the guy who, I don't know, changes the oil in your car. But when he starts singing, man, it's Otis Redding, and
Okay,
it's
so just quick interjection. The same exact thing with Marty Ray. So let's share this story with you, and then I'll let you finish. I had Marty Ray on, and I had a bunch of comments, and somebody said, "Is he going to sing?" Oh, is Richie Wade? I don't know if you know. Richie Wade is Roger Allen Wade's brother,
right.
and so I'm friends with them. And he goes, "He going to sing?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "Hey man, they got a request here. Are you going to sing?" And he goes, and he's sitting in his living room. He's got this giant beard, right? He goes, "I'll sing if you want me to." Now, I actually was on the phone last night with my buddy Jeff Stiles, who's coming on tomorrow. And I was telling Jeff about this. And in the back of my brain, I go, this can go really good.
Yeah, 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 right.
Because we're on this, there's nothing professional studio about this. And man, he tore up sitting on the dock of the bay for about 30 or 40 seconds. And I was so glad because I didn't want it to go bad for him.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. He doesn't look, when you look at him,
Well,
he
Paul,
doesn't look like Marty Ray doesn't look like it. And I'll tell you real quick, if you want to see something funny, go look up Marty Ray Ice Ice Baby, where he
nice,
takes Vanilla's Ice songs and make it sound like Southern rock.
nice.
But that's what you were saying. Sometimes these guys or girls just open their mouth and it's a different person.
Yeah, but he came on and told a story about volunteering at Bonnaroo before he was in a band, and some guy peed on his back, and it was I think it was Steve. He had done his 12-hour shift, so he was stinky, sweaty, whatever, and went to see Stevie Wonder, who was how he wanted, and then all of a sudden he feels something, and he's like, well, I can either watch this show or I can go, back to camp. But he was so good. We did 2 episodes. We
Oh
spread it
wow.
out, and then this past year, Clint, January, we knew the lineup was coming out, and they've always been very helpful, but they've always been real secretive when we'd say, well, who's in the room that books this? Who are the people that actually book? And we'd get a name and then well, I called Ted Heinig, who's the new president.
Yeah.
Ashley's retiring, and I asked if he would be on the show, and he said, "Oh, you don't want me, but how about I get you the 2 guys that actually booked the lineup?" And I couldn't believe it. I said, "Well, absolutely." And so we arranged to do it like that following Thursday, and on Tuesday, I told Brad, I said, "Why don't we drive to Knoxville? I mean, this is big enough and they're close enough." So they said, "Sure, come on up." So we spent an hour and a half in the conference room with the 2 guys that actually booked that wonderful, amazing lineup that no one's going to get to see now.
But it
But
doesn't change your experience. Yeah.
yeah, but to those kinds of things, um, I think it answers your question. What is it I like about it? And
And who were some of the big interviews? But also, too, I'll throw this out there. As it changes, the online, the podcast you're doing, it may change and morph and look different, but it's still going to be, it'll still be about music and the festival because it's not going to go away. And even if it does, it'll come back in a different form. So
Well,
it's here.
that's what we're finding too is, and I hope some of the our listeners out there, I mean, I hope they'll go back and listen to like that Paul Janaway. It doesn't that show is still fun and relevant whether he's on this year's lineup or not.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so we feel like that content sort of is evergreen.
All of them are. That's what I like about them.
Yeah,
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 my listenership or the downloads for some of the earlier podcasts I had a year ago during this quarantine have gone up, have doubled. Some of them because people have more time, and now they're listening to the one I did with David Carnes or with Jeff Styles or Janet
yeah.
Dunn. You fill it in, and yours will. People have got time.
Yeah, and
Um,
we've done a better job of promoting it.
you've
That's
done a lot better job, by the way.
Taco has done a lot of
I've
that.
been watching it, and you've given me more to share. They've
Yeah,
given me some meat to eat on there, man. I like it.
yeah, that was a big thing, and
All
that's
right.
I give Taco a lot of that.
Two more questions, and then we're going to wrap this thing up. Quarantine life. Any new habits? Any books you started reading? Anything you've rediscovered about yourself? Anything cool coming out of this?
I don't know about that. In fact, probably the other. I don't mind sharing this because I'm sure I'm not alone. I did a Zoom interview last week with about 6 or 7 mental health professionals, people,
Mm,
Tennessee suicide prevention and things like that. And the week before that Saturday, so a week ago Saturday, I guess, it didn't dawn on me, but I started cleaning up this office, believe it or not. I know you can't tell, but I started turning the music up louder and louder and louder and did so for about 3 or 4 hours. And it occurred to me that that's normally how I would operate because I'm here by myself and nobody could
right.
hear it outside. I would finish up. I mean, I would sit down to write a story, turn the music on, and immediately turn it all the way back off every day. And then I would finish the story, and then I would go into my other room where the real stereo is. And normally I would turn it really loud, and I would just sit there and stare at the TV. And I mentioned that to some of those health people, and they said, that's a sign of depression, right?
Yeah.
And I was like,
Wow.
no, yeah. So to answer your question, I'm ready to get out of this chair.
I don't think you're alone. I think a
I don't
lot of
think I
people
am.
are hiding behind, I don't know if hiding. I think social media is a good outlet for folks, but I think there are a lot of people who, even if you're doing reading books, there's something about not having access to human beings, even the ones that annoy you, that we need.
Yeah. Yes. So I have read a couple of books. I finished a couple of good TV series. 10 Stars are really good, really weird. Really, if you like Ozark or
Love those.
Justified or any of those types of things, well, this one takes some of it next level kind
Have
of
you watched
stuff.
Peaky Blinders?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that one's good too.
Love Peaky Blinders.
Um, Other than that, I mean, my problem, and I don't really know why I'm not like a germaphobe, but I'm not getting out. I mean, I know a lot of people. I don't want to get out, so I
Yeah.
mean, I stay here. My wife gets up and goes into her work, and I get up, come down here. So,
I don't want to get
um,
out. I'm the boy in the bubble, man.
yeah, well, a lot of it is there's a lot to do work wise. I'm very fortunate. I mean, I really am not complaining. It's just you asked me the question, and it's the reality of what life's been like for 2 months.
I think just so we can clarify, if things were normal and we weren't in a pandemic, and I said, "So how are you doing?" and then you went down that road, that might be complaining. But I think since all of us right now are affected by this global virus that no one can see, and we really don't know what media to trust because this group says this and that group says that, the media is not helped by putting. And I don't mean that to throw it on you, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
The media
No,
with an agenda. I will put a qualifying statement on it. They've not helped our state of mind at all. So
no, I think I'll be honest. I think what we've done at the paper is some of the best work we've done in the 33 years I've been there. It's been focused. It's been news you can use. It's been helpful. Um, I'm proud of what we've done. But you said something a minute ago that asking people how are you. Um, I've stopped doing that because part of what I'm doing is was calling like restaurant owners and you know
Oh,
Tim Hennon after the tornado wipes out Bones,
oh
but
yeah.
that's not the right question, but
Oh,
that's my opening habit. But all I kept getting, well, how do you think I am, dumbass? Or,
yeah. You don't.
or,
I agree. And life changes so fast. I was having lunch at Zarzar's, and at the table was Tim Hennon. This was a month ago. 2 months. No, it's not a month ago. It's probably a couple months ago. It was Tim Hennon, Henry Glasscock, and another buddy of mine. And then you fast forward, 4 or 5 weeks later, nobody can leave their house. And then 3 to 4 weeks after that, the tornado comes through. And now we're all in this uncertainty of going into fall, where if they take football away in the South, good luck. Good luck, government. You think people are protesting in the street yet? You wait till Alabama can't win another championship.
I
By
know.
golly, we'll get ugly.
If you can't watch Alabama play in some high school team, then don't get mad about it. I
You must be a
understand.
Tennessee fan.
I'm a Notre Dame fan.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. Hey, let me do this. Let's wrap it up if you're okay with it. And I'm
Yeah,
gonna
yeah, please, because I
well,
got
when I do
another
this,
one.
yeah, I got a couple. Oh, do you have time for one quick question, or do you need
I
to go?
got 3 minutes.
One quick. Let's skip that. I'll skip my question. Tell everybody where they can find your podcast, and let's roll out of here.
All right. TheWhatPodcast.com. It's on every whatever platform out there, iTunes, iHeart. We've started doing them on YouTube even, so you can. I don't know why you would want to watch, that for an hour, but it's on there.
It's a good podcast.
I
And
appreciate
then
it
you
very
got
much.
people with
People
Barry.
with Barry.
Yeah,
Yep, I'm gonna update that one. I wasn't gonna. It was supposed to be about just other people, but then I realized that I have about 10, 12 stories that I tell all the time. Funny things that have happened to me via the job.
yeah.
That I'm gonna start sharing those too. So
Well, good.
I need to get back on there and do it.
Well, thank you, man. I know you got
Thank
other
you.
stuff
I
doing.
really do appreciate it.
No problem. I'll keep sharing your stuff, and if I can ever help or return the favor, you let me know, sir.
Same here.
All
Anything
right.
I can
Stay
do.
safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Bye, Barry.